That was Disconnect. We've just been talking about well-being in the workplace, and some people maintain that workplace balance by literally disconnecting from their workplace and being like, I have clocked out, I am home, work does not even enter my mind now until tomorrow morning. And to you, I say, well done.
Yes, I would agree with that, because it's not always that easy to do that, is it?
No, definitely not. So that's, if you've just joined us and you've missed us talking about workplace wellbeing, you can either watch the video back on our Facebook, on our YouTube, and on X, formerly Twitter. And this whole show is going to be available on the catch-up service on the website straight after the show. You can go to purewestradio.com/catch-up. And you can even listen back to the last 3 or 4 shows of Healthy Minds, Better Lives if you want to, hopefully, learn a little bit, or not learn necessarily, but find a different perspective on the life that we're living. I think that's how I sit in this chair and think, well, I don't want to dictate what people should do, but I want to at least open their minds a little bit to other alternatives that are out there.
Yeah, and I think that's key, isn't it? Because the more options you're aware of, the better informed you are when you make your decisions.
Yes, and decisions usually come at the end of having some stimulus, some input. So, such as we're going to do a Healthy Minds, Better Lives show. So, what are we going to discuss? We could discuss A, B, C, D, or X, Y, Z, and then we then have a decision to make. And then how we make those decisions, that bit in the middle, it usually comes down to a factor of different things. So, on a radio show, it's this time of year, what will people resonate with, which is why we've looked at workplace. And then today also happens to be Evaluate Your Life Day. And it got me thinking, well, why have we just been talking about what we've been doing? Why are we up at 9:45 talking about these issues? And it's because at some point, Hayley, we've taken stock and we've evaluated that we want to share and hopefully inspire and depart our knowledge of what we've learned. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think there's so many people who would benefit from just open conversations like we have. We have different conversations every time we get together. Just hearing a different perspective, and hearing that maybe there is something different out there that they've not thought about. Maybe there's something out there that they knew was available, but just haven't reached out for it, and now they've been reminded of it. So it's a great space for that kind of thing to happen.
Yeah, and I suppose also there's that permission to go and do something. It's very easy to get into that. I joked about it earlier, actually, but I wake up, I go to work, I come home, I eat, I go to bed, I wake up. That cycle can actually restrict us in doing a lot of exploring as to who else are we.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think we come back to this every time. Social media is a massive distraction, isn't it? So if you're using a lot of social media, then maybe you're not as invested in your own life and creating what you want to create as you would be without it. I was listening to, it was a short on YouTube, I think, today. And oh no, it wasn't. It was a long YouTube video. And there was Bob Proctor and I can't think, Lewis something his surname was. They were talking about turning off the TV, and this Lewis had turned off his TV for 3 months. He hadn't had the TV on, not at all, not watched any programs, because what he'd realised was that it was taking over his space to be creative, to be invested in his business, to do all the things that he wanted to do. The television was kind of, sometimes it's just mindless living, isn't it? You just want to watch TV. So that was really interesting for me, because we've started recently turning the TV off here. We don't have it in, we've started back this week having it on the mornings, but we haven't had it in the mornings. And it does make a difference because you have more conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Isn't it,
think, go on.
isn't it amazing how the TV has just become such an integral part of family life?
Yeah, but is that a good thing?
Now, I know we're going to get onto podcast a little bit later on, but one thing that everyone that I follow on these podcasts says, do not check your phone, do not turn on the TV until you've checked in on yourself first. And I think that having these very easy distractions all around us, and I'm very well aware that the people that are watching us now on social media have probably found us by accident. Hopefully, we're a helpful distraction, but we're still a distraction nonetheless. What it comes down to, what else could you be doing that is, and I don't want to say productive, because we shouldn't be productive all the time.
No.
And that's something which I need to get better at doing, talking about evaluating our lives. I always think that everything must have an outcome, and I find that difficult to overcome. But if you are just coming in, you're being like, oh, I'm going to switch off from the day. And if you've had a stressful day, everyone should have that switch off. But what is that at the expense of? And I suppose that's the key thing, isn't it?
I suppose it depends on what you mean by switch off, because if you're turning the TV on, you're re-stimulating yourself with something else. And we're constantly stimulated, aren't we? We're 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And as we've been talking about workplace well-being, workplace buddies are emailing each other to find out if they've done this, that, the other, or somebody's awake at 3 o'clock and they're emailing, or they're WhatsApping, or because if I don't do it now, I'll forget. But then if you're the type of person who feels like they should respond, then that has a massive impact. But for me, evaluating your life is really about understanding what you want out of it to begin with. And if you're investing in distractions, is that what you want? Is giving your, I don't know, let's say 3, 4, 5 hours of an evening to TV or social media, whichever it is that really what you want?
Oh, it's a big question, isn't it? And you're talking about stimulus there. And like, there's lots of horrifying images in the news at the moment. And whenever you turn the TV on, you can't escape what we're seeing over in the Middle East at the moment. Before that, Ukraine. Before that, COVID. Like, all of this time that we came out of this lockdown, there's been terror on the TV, and it's like, are you actually switching off, or are you now actively keeping yourself in a situation of, oh my goodness, everything around me is bad? And then what does that do to our own individual psyche?
And this is part of the problem, though. And I'll ask you a question now, particularly for people who feel that they're overwhelmed, that they are struggling to cope with things, that maybe anxiety is bad, maybe depression is really bad. The question for me is the problem the problem? I can see your
Okay.
face now, Tom.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I'm wearing.
Well, are you putting so much frustration, so much terror, so much fear into your life that that's what's having an impact on your emotional well-being? So is the problem that you are really overwhelmed and anxious or depressed or feeling low? Or is there something else going on that's causing you, something that you're putting into your life? Is that having an effect that's making you feel like that? And we often get so focused on what we think is the problem, but very often they are just the symptoms.
Nice.
So when you start to evaluate, you start to evaluate in your life, is that a symptom or is it a problem? And then you start to see very different things, because that question takes you in different directions.
It really does. In fact, I know someone recently who's had there's been a few changes, but all of a sudden their sleeping pattern's gone out the window. And I was like, well, what do you think's causing it? Is there anything physically changed in the room? Is anything changed in your daily routine? Like, what else could it be? And they're like, well, I haven't really thought about it. And it was like, well, have you at least tried like writing down a massive mega list of all of your stream of thought and see what's what? And is that a good place to start? Where would you recommend if let's move in now to let's evaluate our life. If we were to come to see you now, Hayley, where would your starting point be?
I would suggest you want to know what's going on for you at the moment. And it's a question we don't ask ourselves. Again, I love questions. So what is going on for me at the moment? When you start there, you start looking at different things, because if you start to say, my life is this, that, the other, that's fine. But what's going on for you? Are you stressed? Is something affecting your stress? Are you not talking to friends and family? Have you stopped socializing? Again, back to that, is the problem. So when you start to understand this is where I'm at now, then you start to go, okay, so where do I want to be? So as you were saying there, when you start to see it on paper, as you start writing things down, seeing it on paper is completely different to having it just going around in your head. So you start to write different things down. I did a session with a client last night, and as we were doing this thing, I was typing something on Zoom as she was saying it, and something came out, and she went, "I just did not know that about myself."
Wow.
And I think that's the key, isn't it? We hold all these things in here, but when you start to write them and give yourself permission to write, that changes things. But when you know where you are now and you know where you want to be, and then you've got that sort of offload on paper, then you have a sort of, it's the foundations to moving forward, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's not even, or it might not even necessarily be a form of denial either. It might just be that complete lack of awareness as to that's what it was, because you haven't even given yourself time to even consider it. And that's really important, because you're not writing these things down to judge yourself. You're not saying that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad, that's bad, that's bad, that's good. You're doing it literally just to get it out. I think it's important in that first stage that you don't really quantify anything with it. It's just something that you've thought.
Pop it on paper. There's so many different ways of doing it, mind maps and just writing lists. So whichever type of person you are you an essay writer? Do you need to just do sentences? Whatever type of person you are, get it on paper. As you rightfully said, no judgment, just understanding. And things do pop up that you think, oh, that's not something I realized was going on. And yes, you are right. It's not about being completely ignorant, but you so focus on something else, or you're focused on the symptoms of something, or that just wasn't part of the past of the plan.
Yeah. And I think because I've done this exercise with a few people before, and they deliberately leave some things off. And it's because I don't want to be revealed. And there is that fear of, well, I can't say that because I'm this person. But actually, the fact that you've had that thought means that you are also that person. It's not either or. You can be all of the thoughts that you've got, because they've come from somewhere.
And actually, the more honest you are with yourself, the better able you are to evaluate and to move forward. Because if you hold things back, they're still going to be there. If they're a challenge or a problem or a barrier, unless you get them out, they'll still be there.
Yeah. For those that might have difficulty being fully honest with themselves, or being just fully honest with themselves and actually putting everything down, how can they help themselves, or what else can they do to help them? Because it is like peeling off all the onions. I remember leading a writing group, and one of the questions was, write a letter to yourself. And the response that people had off the back of writing it was like they didn't know that they had all that in them. So it can be a scary prospect, particularly if you haven't been brought up in an environment that's open, where you talk freely about your feelings and about your aspirations, or about certain things. That can be, it can be really overwhelming. What support structures can we put in place to help us with that first level?
The way that I advise clients to do it is to start with the obvious things, the things that come up immediately that are easy to deal with, get them on paper, then leave it alone for a bit. Go away, whether it's a couple of days, whatever you need, take some time, then come back and then do the hard bits one step at a time. One at a time. If you can put it on paper, if you're finding that hard and you have some trusted people in your life, bring them in as part of your accountability. And if they would know you really well, then they can sort of guide you as well.
Okay, so it's okay to get a trusted person in with you, and to kind of share that journey with them. Maybe you could do it almost together.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. And again, it's the fear of people judging us, rejecting us. How would they react if they knew this stuff about me? But how many of us are thinking very similar thought, but pretending we're not?
That's a very
Far
good
too
point.
many.
Yeah, and in fact, in the work that I've done previously with ACT, is that the flip side of that is, I'm afraid of this person understanding who the true me is. well, that means that at least one of you is playing an act at the moment, which means that you're not being true to yourself. And maybe if that person is a hindrance to you being who you are, then is that beneficial for you anyway?
But for some, it's the self-protect, isn't it? So it feels beneficial, and I think that's the fake beneficial. It feels safe, it feels comfortable, it feels predictable. So they just keep doing the same thing, and they keep presenting what they want to present. But actually, the feeling when you are really genuine to yourself and authentic with yourself and who you are, that's a very different place to be, and that's a very different way to present yourself. It's a very different way to feel in yourself. But it feels amazing to do that. It's just overcoming that fear of what other people will say. And if I don't know if what if I don't like myself? If I come out as my authentic self, what if I don't like myself?
Mm. Yeah. Oh, that's a very good point, actually. If you end up, because of course, to get to where we are now, our whole life has trained us to be who we are now, and all
Mhm.
of a sudden we reveal what's going on. It might change relationships with those around you, but as you say, it might even change relationship with yourself.
Yeah. And most people will assume they won't like who they are. And I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? Because we don't talk about the negative emotions and all the stuff we've been through with an emotional impact perspective. But people are afraid. If I don't like myself, then nobody's going to like me. So who will I be then?
And that is a scary prospect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden then, and our minds have a wonderful way, it's a self-preservation thing. The mind's got a
Mm.
wonderful way of catastrophizing and saying, oh, if you do this, then no one's going to talk to you again. And you believe it, even though it doesn't actually mean anything. It's just trying to keep you safe.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a really tough place to be, isn't it? Because if you've got somebody who's really desperate to be who they are supposed to be, who want to be genuine and want to be authentic, but struggle because of past history, life experiences, then we need a better society where people can become more comfortable in doing that.
Yeah. And for those that might start this exercise, they've written down those easy ones that you said, and now they're delving into some of the deeper, more difficult thoughts to overcome. What if they have written these down and they've made some minor changes to how they go about their day-to-day business, but there's still those deep-rooted ones. But from their perspective, actually, I'm quite content and happy where I am. Is that okay?
I think it is okay. If you're not ready to be pushed on to the next level, because there'll be a next level and a next level. If you're not ready to be pushed, why not enjoy what you've already achieved currently until you're ready for the next step?
I like that because that's the thing. When people say evaluate your life, and you might come up with this outcome, but on that journey to that outcome, you might actually find actually that wasn't necessarily what I wanted, and we can change and adjust whenever we want.
Absolutely. I recently spoke to somebody who I have a really clear goal of where I want my business to go. I can see it, I can smell it, I can sit in the actual visualization of this goal. But I'm struggling to see what's between now and then. And somebody said to me, the goal may not be the problem, and yet it might be, but the goal might not be the problem. You might just be on the wrong train. And I
Oh,
was like,
so a
"Mm,
different there's a different path.
yes." So that was really interesting to me because I hadn't really thought about it being needing to have a different path, or that there was a different option. Again, lack
And
of awareness.
exactly, and then learning from others, which we're going to get to a little bit later on with where we get some of our inspiration from.
Yeah.
Um, so we've written this list down now. So all of those thoughts that were swirling around are now on paper, and now we're thinking, well, great, I've got all this information, and maybe I'm not as well put together as I might have thought I was. What's the next step from there?
It's working towards that goal, isn't it? So if you know where you're headed, that's going to dictate what step is taken next. So once you have everything on paper, all your thoughts on paper, it's about making sure that you feel empowered enough if they're negative thoughts to change them. Now, that's not always an easy thing to do. It's possible. It's always possible. It's not always easy. So it's about deciding how you want to think about things. So let's say, for example, somebody really struggles with barriers for promotion. So they always get so far in promotion and they never get promoted. It's about understanding what are the barriers, how do you react to the barriers, and then what are your options so you can decide what actions to take.
Hmm. So actually understanding where you are and what lies there. Going back actually to what we said about being proactive with certain aspects in work, actually, it's like, right, what there's your three questions. What can I do, and what have I identified?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Catherine has just left us a comment on Facebook, and first of all, sending you best wishes to you and your mum. And I am going to link this in to what we're talking about now. But hi, it's possible to hear simply the best from Tina Turner for my mum who's unwell right now with lung cancer, please. Now, Catherine, sending lots of love and well wishes to the whole family. We are going to play that song for you, so don't worry. But we're talking about evaluating our lives, and sometimes, Hayley, something comes along and all of a sudden, all of our paths and directions and goals and outcomes can be pushed completely aside by something life changing. What advice do you have for someone that might have just been completely sideswiped in the course of just everyday life?
I think it's just taking it. How do you eat an elephant? One step at a time, one bite at a time. It's taking those little baby steps, isn't it? Just understanding what's going on at the moment, where are you at the moment, and then checking out what the options are. The three questions I love questions all the time. Three other questions I would ask in that situation is, what are my options? So what can I do about it? In an ideal world, what would I like to do about it? But in the real world, what am I actually going to do about it? That
I like that
brings
last
a bit
one.
of accountability. I like the ideal world one is a bit sort of pie in the sky. However, something might come out of that you wouldn't assume would be an option. But
Hmm.
when you start to ask those questions, you start to see different solutions, different options, different availabilities.
Yeah. And in fact, a life changing diagnosis or circumstance that happens is actually when we decide to evaluate our life. And thinking back to my previous work in cancer services, is it's at that point that people take stock as to, well, hang on, like I've got to this age, or my parents only that old, or grandparents that old. It was like, well, hang on, what do I want to be? How do I want to be with them? And that's those questions that you're asking there. And I suppose having an evaluate your life day allows us to think of those questions before a life changing diagnosis.
Yeah, and I think we're not always going to know how we're going to react in any given situation. It's about sort of if you know yourself, and back to that empowerment, isn't it? The more you know yourself, the better able you are to make the right decisions for you. And I think that's key in situations where it's absolutely life changing, and you've kind of realised that this isn't how I want to live, and I've maybe got a short space of time that I need to change things. But the thing to always do is to take action. Don't just write things down. Don't just think about things. Have an action plan and take the action, because nothing changes without the action.
And that is probably the crux of it. It's that overcoming whatever prejudices we have with certain aspects of life or certain places, certain people. Until you actually do something, nothing's going to move or nothing's going to change anyway.
No, and we are responsible for that. Nobody can do that for us. And I think what I'm talking about empowerment, when you empower somebody in the workplace or at home in society, you empower them to make all those right decisions and to live the life that they deserve and that they want.
Yeah. And in fact, I'm going to use it's it's relatively tenuous, but it does link with cancer and also people in high profile situations that you would think, oh wow, where did they go? And I'm talking about the actor Rick Moranis. Now, if you don't know Rick, if you're of a certain age, he was comedy gold growing up. He was in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. He was in the Flintstones, and also in Little Shop of Horrors. And he was the funny man of the 90s. and all of a sudden he completely disappeared. But it was through choice. It was his action that did that. His wife was diagnosed with cancer. They had a young family, they had young children, and he would have had an evaluation more than likely. And he decided that his life was going to be devoted to his children, not to the craft of performing in Hollywood and all these films. And the crucial thing that he did is he didn't just think about, oh, I'm going to be there for my children, I'm going to be there for my children. He stopped doing work. Like he was fortunate to be in that position that he didn't have to be in Hollywood blockbusters anymore. I'm sure that they helped pay the way a little bit, and he was in that situation. But he could have had superstardom like no one had ever known before. But he was like, no, my values. I want my life to be about family, and that could be the case for you. And and it was the action that did that. It was, no, I'm not going to do it, because I'm going to focus over here. And I suppose having that focus is really important when we're evaluating as to who we want to be. Do we want to be there for ill family members? Do we want to be so work proud that we're going to devote our life to our organizations? And where does that balance come from? But it is about what you do.
Yeah, and I think awareness is massive, isn't it? We've talked about it a couple of times tonight, but sometimes we're shocked into awareness and we have no option but to be in awareness, even when we don't want to be in awareness. But if we practiced awareness more effectively throughout our lives, maybe we wouldn't be quite as shocked when things turned up in our lives that were unexpected. And I'm not saying that we're never going to be hurt. We are going to be hurt. There's lots of things going to happen in life. But the more aware we can become of our lives and how we live our lives, and the more intentional we become, I think we can reduce the impact of things. I don't know. I think we sometimes are less invested in our lives than we should be.
Yeah. One thing which I'm a big advocate of is putting ourselves in as many uncomfortable situations as possible. And the term is to increase your psychological flexibility. Well, if I could do that, then I could probably do that, or I'll respond in that situation should it ever come and affect me. And that's similar to what you're saying there. If we put ourselves in situations that we wouldn't naturally or organically go to, then you're going to be better able to tackle them in a similar situation in the future. And so that's just kind of throwing yourself in there. Another more measured way of doing something is by actually scaling. And there's another piece of work that you can look at, where you look at, if I was to wake up tomorrow and everything was how I wanted my life to be, that would be a 10 out of 10. And then you go back and you think, right, where am I on a scale as close to that at this moment in time? And it might be 5. It might be 5 out of 10. And then you start looking at, and this goes back to the action point, what can I do to get from 5 to 5.5? What can I do that's different on a day-to-day basis to help me move towards that 10 out of 10? And you can scale it, and then you can go back, and it's measurable. Then you can go back in like 4 weeks' time and be like, right, I said I was going to be more like this. This was 5, and have I been living in line with what I wanted to do 4 weeks ago? If so, or if not, why not? And then what am I moving to get to 6? So you can measure it in a certain in a type of way as well.
I like the small steps that, from 5 to 5.5. You're not trying to get to 10 immediately, because that's overwhelming as well, isn't it? To think, I've got to go from 5 to 10. That can be really big and a massive barrier. But to be able to say, I want to go from 5 to 5.5, or even to 6, I'm ready to go to 6. Such a difference.
Yeah, it really is. Today is Evaluate Your Life Day. Hopefully, we've given you some food for thought, and maybe the thoughts aren't the things that you knew you were feeding, but everything that we do typically feeds our thoughts. So it'd be interesting to see what comes out on your piece of paper. You don't need to share it with us, but there's no judgment here. And just to remind you, we don't want judgment from you either. When you're writing your thoughts down, nothing's good or bad. They're just things that you're thinking. So be mindful of that. And very quickly, because we haven't really talked about that. Well, I've talked about the perfect scenario, but you ground your work, and I do as well with ACT, but looking at values. How can we assess our values?
this is for me, it's a really important part of living life the way we want to live it. And I break the values down into core values, and then around the core values we have well-being values, relationship values, parenting values, social media values, friendship values, I'm trying to think now, family values, so professional values. So you start to identify what values are in each of those areas of your life. So that start with your core values, and there's lists and lists online. You can find plenty of if you stick in lists of values, you'll have masses of them online on a search, and then narrow it down to, if it's hard and you think you want to put 20, but narrow it down to about 3 to 5. Start with your core values and then work out to all the other areas of your life. And it just it allows you to be in alignment with who you really are.
Mm-hmm. And that's the key thing, because then you can actually be who you actually are. To some people, that might be very overwhelming. And if that is the case, find either a trusted person or a trusted organization that you can go to. We've got Mind, we've got there's services with Get the Boys a Lift. There's lots of agencies around that have specialist people available to talk to you should you uncover something about yourself or unearth something that you may have suppressed. Writing about values, getting the thoughts out of your head is great, but sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. So be sure that you do have access points, and we've got information on our website of some of those organizations as well, particularly with World Mental Health Day being just 9 days ago as well. So we've got a whole list of organizations that we can signpost you onto. Fantastic. We've evaluated, well, thankfully, Hayley, we've got away. We haven't actually evaluated our lives live on air.
No, not today.
Not today. We've got the best from Tina Turner coming your way. I've just realised that I've put a different version in. We're going to want the actual one, aren't we? So that's from the musical. Where is it? The Best. There it is. That's the one I want. Playing this for Catherine Halliday, and in fact, Anna's been in touch. She wants, "Can you bring me sunshine?" A nice happy song. So it's only short, the one that I've got here. So we'll play them for you. But Hayley, when we come back, well, first a reminder: before the end of the show, we're going to give you insight as to signs and symptoms of glaucoma, because you might be at higher risk. You might not be aware of the signs or symptoms. So we're using this platform to educate you. And also, Hayley, you were chatting with Professor Green a couple of days ago as well.
Yes, yeah, that's going to be exciting to air out as well.
Yeah, so another resource for people that may be struggling in this financial climate and the impact that's having on mental health as well. So be sure to stay tuned for that. When we come back, though, a lot of these thoughts and ideas that we've been having have come from various trainings and various experience, but there's one way that I make the use of long car journeys in upskilling myself. I don't know when you listen to yours, Hayley.
Yeah, well, I've only recently started listening to podcasts, believe it or not.
Right, we're gonna jump into podcast listening and what you can learn and how you can use them to benefit you as well. And we're going to give you insight as to some of our faves, as to what we find works for us. But for Catherine and her mum, who is unwell at the moment, here is Tina Turner, "The Best for You." As we approach, it's 10:15 here on Purest Radio. You're listening to Healthy Minds, Better Lives.